welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, as always, and we have a guest who wasn't afraid of me last time because they have returned, Ken. Welcome back, Ken.
Thank you so much for having me back. Really pleased to be here.
Of course. Well, I'm having you back because I heard about the game that is on the screen right here, right now, Void 1680 AM or 1680 AM. How would you say it?
I'd say 1680, but I've heard it both ways, so whatever's comfortable.
Okay. And I was excited about this. We're going to talk about this today, and it's because I'm getting into solo journaling games at the moment, and I'm not a huge fan of writing. And then I kind of realized that I could just record myself talking when doing these games because there's no rules not to. And so I was kind of interested in that. And this game is obviously about radio and things like that. So I was like, this absolutely could fit into that for me. So this is the game we're going to be talking about at the moment. This is pre-recorded, so if you're watching us live, unfortunately we can't take your questions live, but I plan to be in the chat, so if you have any questions for me to write down, I'll try and answer and put links in as we go live. And if you're listening to the podcast, any links that we talk about will be in the show notes. But Ken, last time when I have people on, I normally ask, what's your history and background with role-playing games? When did you start gaming? But if people are interested in that, they can go back and listen to the last episode you were on. So this week, instead, I'm going to ask you about your history and background with solo journaling RPGs, because I think sometimes that's quite niche, even in the RPG kind of sector. So could you talk about how you got into it?
Sure. Yeah. It was pretty much by accident. A friend of mine, his name's Ryan K. Lindsay. He's a comic book writer. He started working on these one-page solo RPGs based on a system called Second Guess System. Very simple. And he basically created and positioned them as writing tools, something to get you started to write a story. Because he also writes, he writes all kinds of things, all kinds of mediums. And I just really like the idea and my, typical response. I see that sort of thing. I want to break it down, see how it works. So I played through a couple of his games. I checked out the system. It was based on a couple of those games, and did a couple myself that were just like one page. I've got them up for like $2 or something like that. Just to explore different ways to use that particular system. And I just found I really liked it. Shortly after that, I started reading more solo games, most especially The Wretched, and then Long Haul 1983, which is based on The Wretched, and both have audio log components. And that and another book I'd been reading at the time kind of collided into my first kind of like full length one.
Amazing.
Called Lighthouse at the End of the World. And that really, people seemed to really like that. And that was very much I'll do the games that are, like big group fun, big hooky, easy to pitch type things. And then I'll do the games that are kind of for me. And Lighthouse was one of those, and people really seem to love it. So that just inspired me to keep going, essentially.
Fantastic. So one question I get from people that haven't played any kind of solo journaling games is kind of people say, oh, well, it feels like an inherently social thing to me. What do you get out of solo RPGs?
So they're both kind of the two that I've done, and especially this one, they're very meditative. And to me, this one, it doesn't have a win or fail state. You can't lose. Void 1680 AM. It is specifically about having you take a closer look at your relationship to the music that you love. For me, in a very practical way, I listen to a lot of music my entire life. And I forget what I liked even 5 years ago in favor of what I'm listening to now.
Sure.
And a lot of these prompts were a way to get me to stop and really think about first bands I saw live, first, albums I ever purchased, something I shared in common with my parents or things like that, to really start thinking back to the origin point of my love for music, and also to break out of that mold of just what have I been listening to lately. It is very much intentionally within the setting, within the fiction of the game. When it's the gameplay, it's about you being by yourself, sitting with yourself, looking at these prompts, seeing what emerges from them, and seeing what kind of narrative you end up building with the songs that you pick.
Amazing. So, we kind of skirted around the issue, but I think it's time to kind of dive in now.
Sure.
So give us the pitch. You kind of have a little bit, but what's the pitch? How do you describe Void 1680 AM to people?
Sure. Yeah, it's a solo playlist building game. So it puts you in the position of an AM radio operator, kind of implied your way out alone somewhere in the countryside, more or less talking to yourself. So you use pretty simple stuff, just a deck of regular playing cards and a D6 to build your playlist, which is in basically 4 song blocks. and with breaks in between where you talk as this DJ character. And it's been very interesting to see some people take it as a given that they should create a character, and some people just speak as themselves.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Does the game leave that open to your interpretation then, I suppose?
For sure. The first version of this game was very guided in terms of tone, and you're this kind of character, and it's kind of a spooky setting and all that. And I really sat back and said, okay, that's how I would play this game.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily want to dictate that for anyone else. And so I leave many things open-ended, many things kind of unspoken. And I think it's kind of informative for me, and I hope for the players as well, the assumptions they make. And they go, oh, I should create a character for this. Oh, I should do this, that, or the other. Oh, I should stick to a genre, or I should just do the music I love, or whatever it is. It's kind of a Rorschach where people interpret how best to play suits them, basically.
Okay. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted your flow of explaining the game. But yes, so people are playing. You're playing the role, or being yourself as this person speaking into the void.
And the second piece of it is the collars. So using playing cards, using the face cards in a standard playing card deck, those will help you create the personalities and the concerns of the people who call into your show. And there's real basic mechanics in there to determine if they're reacting to a song you're playing, if they're requesting a song for the next block. And one thing I threw in there, because initially this was going to be a one and done, you do one show, it's over. But I did create a system at the end to how to basically continue the stories of the callers. So if you pull the card, you talk about them, and you write on the card a very brief summary of whatever it is you talked about, family concerns, financial, whatever it is. There's tables. If that card comes up again in later playings, you evolve their story. So something's changed. What happened to them since the last time you talked to them? And then you kind of build up and kind of figure out what happens to them, and then it concludes. So there is this one, you're having dialogue with yourself over music, but the second piece is you're sort of creating these characters and almost having conversations with extensions of your own imagination.
Yeah, so even if you are playing as yourself, like you interpret it that way of like, okay, this is gonna be me if I were that, you are still role playing and creating characters by extension with your callers. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I love the concept of it, and this is definitely something I'm going to play. What was your inspiration to kind of create it? Do you have a relationship with kind of radio or disc jockeying or?
So outside of gaming, I've always loved the romance of radio. Since I was a kid, the oldest bookmark I have in my browser I've been carrying for about 20 years is how to buy an AM radio station. And I did for a hot minute, a couple of years, actually, work at a radio station here in town. Nothing fancy. It was on the promo team, but I went to a lot of events, jumped in on a lot of shows and read commercials and things like that. Just very much on the fringes, but there. And I really liked it's in a way, even though it's not that old as a medium, it feels kind of old school. It feels kind of romantic. It feels kind of, I don't know, just this like almost a relic, but something that's still very easy to do, very accessible. And it's always just stuck with me, that image of the person alone in the booth, talking and just kind of laying it all out there because they feel the need to express themselves. And then within gaming, really it was both The Wretched and Long Haul 1983, because they have that audio log component, which to me is such a different feeling. My previous solo game, Lighthouse, was a journal writing exercise. And I'm a writer. I don't need that much help pushing me to write, but this having a performance aspect to me felt very different in that way. It's not just writing something down. You whether it's yourself, a character, whatever, you have to come up with what you're going to say. And then Anamnesis, really, family games in general, the solo ones, especially the structure, the act structure that you can find in those, that really helped me figure out kind of the movements of this from song block to song block. Like it really just said, oh, okay, here you go. Because in the development of this, I really was, okay, so you have this blob of songs, now what? And then this Anamnesis especially gave me kind of a structure for not only making it bite-sized as you go, and you can take breaks and come back tomorrow and have like a logical pickup point, but also just to give a framework for like the story you're telling over the playlist.
Amazing. Oh, well, if people are interested in Anamnesis and want to hear more about that game, we do actually have a Not D&D episode where we had Sam on to talk about that. So you can check that out if that has piqued your interest in that game. But it was really interesting what you said. I want to come back to you because I kind of said at the beginning, solo journaling games turned me off because I'm not a writer. I'm also really dyslexic. So the idea of writing something out, I was like, no. And so the concept of being able to just speak and perform it, and when I realized I could just do that as a get around was really interesting. But I find it so interesting you say that it's a really different experience writing opposed to speaking and performing. Like in what sort of way? Like how is playing a solo game writing opposed to speaking it out? What makes it quite different?
Yeah, it's for me, the journaling games, you can be really deliberate and slow with it if you want to really think about it. And that's the trap I fall into, is overthinking them. But yeah, I want to build up the structure. I want to write in the voice of this character. I want to make sure I'm hitting all the things in the prompts and kind of their implications. And it's a different kind of brain exercise, I think. This one, even though in theory you can take your time, figure out, script your breaks if you want to and read them, to me, it's the improvisational nature. You have the basic prompts of what your caller talked about. You have whatever moved you based on the prompts to choose the songs you chose on the previous block. And then you just got to go. And there's a sort of that lack of preparation where you have to just jump and go. And there's, most of the prompts have very specific questions that are kind of leading you in somewhere or another to explain, why did you pick this song when posed with this prompt? Is I just want to get people talking. And I feel like, the idea of this, if you're a voice, if you're alone, if you're broadcasting to who knows what, they're not seeing your face, all that, you're a little freer, I guess, to just say what comes naturally. And I think I wanted some of that, just that permission to be vulnerable about the things that you love.
Yeah. I like the sound of it. I just think it's interesting because I've not done the writing version of solo journaling. I was like, I wonder what I'm missing out by not doing that experience. And I think that's really great to hear from you, who's thought about it very deeply in designing this game. Another thing that you thought about, you've chosen to be AM opposed to FM on the radio. Is that intentional? Does that have a meaning, or is that attached to it? Because I'm not as au fait with radio, so I'm not sure if that has an implication.
Sure. Yeah. At least in the US. So AM's very broadly, simply speaking, it's cheaper, it's easier, it has much shorter range. FM is where kind of the rock stations live and all that. And that's especially, I live in Dallas, Texas. It's a very competitive radio market. You're not getting an FM station unless you've got $50,000 and a lawyer. Whereas AM, as long as you're under a certain power output, basically, as long as you're only broadcasting with a certain range, you can do whatever you want. It's not against the law, it's whatever. So to me, I created this radio station for myself in my garage before I ever even thought about writing this game. And AM is the only thing you can legally buy, like a transmitter and tower and all that for in the first place. But to me, that kind of spoke to that sort of individual rebel radio spirit. Where it's you by yourself and it's only you deciding what goes out there. And to me, it has that parallel to indie game publishing, where you can just decide what is the thing that I want to do, if I don't have to make any compromises, if I don't have to, take any notes from money people or whatever, and just do the thing I want to do. And that to me is kind of that spirit I'm tapping into with AM radio specifically. FM is so protected and so costly. It's kind of very heavily monitored. And very heavily program directed, and just kind of a lot of soul's been squeezed out of it. AM, you can just kind of do whatever, and that's really what I wanted. That really spoke to me.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I love that comparison you drew between bigger game publishers, maybe people that would not come on this show, for example, and then indie game publishers, not to mention any names. Talking about the game as well. So I wanted to touch on the artwork here, because there's a lot of this. I mean, if you're listening to the podcast, this is not going to be as you can't see what I'm showing, but it's kind of like well, Ken, do you want to describe the artwork and why you chose it, actually?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of the style of the book itself, I mean, it's very dry, very technical manual, and I basically pulled from an old 1940s how to build a radio guide. So the little page dividers and all that are straight out of that PDF, and the radio diagrams were part of that. And I was trying to figure out how can I juice this up a little bit. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Dylan Todd, who's credited as the designer here. So he basically bashed together different diagrams, like existing radio diagrams and other technical diagrams, to make things that they look, oh, okay, these technical diagrams look complex and interesting, but you start to look at them and they just don't make sense. And that's on purpose. Like, they're just confusing. And it kind of gives you that air of strangeness to it. The longer you look at them, the weirder they get. This one's got light bulbs and hands with soldering irons, and there's a house there, and another one has a guy in like a tabletop, like a fan going. Like, they're just kind of weirder the more you look at them. And that's what I wanted. I wanted this suggestion of dryness, that this is a very technical, like artifact you found almost. But the closer you look, the weirder it gets. I think is kind of the thing that Dylan and I settled on.
And I think that's going to echo in the game with the stories, I imagine. So what, well, like you said, the setting and things, you've left very open to people's interpretation. So they could do, whatever they want with it. But with the game, like we talked a little bit about how the mechanics, you'll need a deck of cards, you'll need a D6. So how does it actually play out? Like, what's the structure? What does a session look like?
Sure. I've got a prompt up front that kind of like asks you to sit for a minute and think about, who is this person? Is it you? Is it a persona? What kind of station are you going to settle on, a genre or a decade, or just keep it wide open or whatever? Just some, not even telling you to answer questions, just like, hey, think about this. And then you go into it. Basically, you have your deck of cards that you break up by all the suits, and then face cards are their own pile. So you have 5 spades, diamonds, hearts, clubs, and then the face cards. And then the song blocks are very structured. You start with diamonds, with clubs. Yes, you start with clubs. You draw 3 cards. You shuffle. You draw 3 cards from that. You look at the prompts for that suit. And you pick kind of based on those questions. Questions are very open-ended. It's what's a song, what's an us song you used to share with someone you're no longer in a relationship with, something like that. Or what's a band that you liked that you hid from your parents? Was it silly to do that? Or was it a good thing that you hid that from your parents? Just to like really hit these kind of very specific emotional beats, times in your life. You do those 3, you play those 3. And this to me is very important, is I want you to sit and listen to the songs you picked in whatever order you arrange them in for that 3-song block. And at that point, as you're listening, you draw a face card for your caller, and the face card tells you approximate age. And then you roll a D6, and based on a few tables from that, it's what mood are they in? What are they calling about? Is it financial concerns, family? Is it a new relationship? Is it a relationship ending? These kinds of things. It's that trick you always try to hit when you're writing these games, where it's pretty open-ended, but also pretty specific. Like, I want to hit a very particular reaction in you. But whatever each individual player's reaction is will probably be different from the next player's. And it just repeats like that for 4 song blocks. And there's instructions in there for how to do like your intro for the whole show, and how to do your outro at the end. And then the rules in the back for, if you come back and play again, how to like evolve the stories of the people who are calling in to talk to you.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And how long does it take kind of to play? Is this like you said, it can be, you can make it episodic if you want to, or it can be a one shot. So what sort of...
I settled on about 12 songs because, at least in my experience, that tends to be about 50 minutes to an hour on the long side. So depending on how intentional you are, and because some folks have told me they could spend a long time picking songs based on the prompts, where they just go with their gut instinct on each one. So it really can take you anywhere from about that hour, including songs and you talking between them, if you're just going off the cuff, to if you're much more deliberate and you script what you're talking about between breaks and all of that. It can go much longer. Dylan, who designed the diagrams, did a show, the most recent broadcast I put out there, and he fully scripted his callers, and he performed his callers, and then used voice modulation to change their voices, and edited it all together. So in his breaks, he was talking to himself, like complete with interruptions and things like that. It was pretty crazy. You do not have to go to that extent to play, but that option is available for you. But generally speaking, about an hour and a half. And if you want to go longer, that's certainly an option.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds really... that seems far less intimidating a time frame to sit down and give it a try out for sure, for an hour or 2. That sounds really good. One thing I noticed I noticed when I was looking through the details, you mentioned about using others' voices in the game.
Sure.
How does that work?
So to me, backing up a little bit, the theme of the game so much is about, I mentioned that indie game designer kind of vibe. You're just doing the thing you want to do.
Yeah.
It also speaks to me about the general creative process. You're putting things out,
Mm-hmm.
out there. You never know who's listening to you, and you just keep
Mm-hmm.
doing it because that's what you got to do. And the responses you get sometimes are pretty surprising.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, this felt like an opportunity to to build a community of lone voices,
Mm-hmm.
basically like loners out there and kind of communicating with each other. So yeah, one of the sort of like extended systems I have in there is if you want to be a caller that other people use on their show, if they don't know how to, if they don't want to invent someone, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I just have a Dropbox folder going of people
Oh,
call
cool.
in. I've got a number set up in the game itself that you can call, leave a voicemail. I'll vet it first, and as long as it's not like super profane or something, yeah, like
Yeah.
I'll be me as long as it meets basic standards of decency. R-rated is fine, but
Yeah.
I'll throw it in the Dropbox folder and just let people pick them and use them for their own games if they want to. It's a chance again if people get the performance aspect down and they find they really like it. It's a way to do that to add to the game and kind of build the lore for other people to pull from and kind of be delighted by.
Amazing. And the link for that, I'm guessing, will be on the itch page where if people want to contribute or have a look at that.
Yeah, and it's in the book as well. Yeah, I've
Fantastic
got all the instructions are in there in the back. Basically, if you want to either have your show rebroadcast or if you want to become part of the caller library, it's all there and it's all online, Dropbox, whatever, publicly available files.
Fantastic. So it can be something you do just for yourself as like a solo exercise, or it can be something that you join this bigger community, which sounded really exciting to me and something I'm definitely very interested in. So you talked earlier about how you've left the theme open. And for me, I don't know if this is me bringing my bias into it, but when it said speak into the void, you never know who's listening. There was something a bit eerie and creepy about it. And my mind, the story I started telling to myself was like, there's something gone very wrong in the world where we have to be separate. And there's a reason why we're so alone and the awfulness of that. But I was wondering if everyone else has lent into that, or what other things people have done, or I don't know what that says about me, but just if you could share what other people have done.
Well, it's I like I say, I kind of leave it open to interpretation, and it's you can look at that cover and you can interpret, is that dawn, is that dusk, like what's the vibe, and it does. I think people tend to read what you read into it, and that's probably unavoidable because that's my tendency as well. It's probably there. I try to make it as neutral as possible, but there is that little bit of, it's funny you say that, the speaking to the void. For me, speaking to the void, you never know who is listening, is ominous or it's encouraging. And it's the experience I've had publishing games where I put something out there and 6 months later, someone will say, hey, this was great, or hey, I had a really good time with this, or hey, I made a really special connection with someone over this. And it'll be like that moment of like, oh, wow, I never expected this to happen. I never knew people would react in this way. So it's kind of about, it can be, if you choose to take it that way, about the joy of doing this sort of thing, just speaking your truth and seeing who calls back, who says me too, basically. But no, it's funny. The very first thing I did, actually just put it out this past week, is I did a free caller expansion sheet, basically pages that would replace the caller sheets that are in the current book. And I did a much more intentionally strange and weird vibe to them, because there was enough of a like, hey, enough people have had that interpretation of it. So I decided to like, okay, let's just do it. Let's do a caller sheet that it's one of those, it's not overtly supernatural monsters, whatever, but everyone who's calling in has clearly got issues. And it's kind of up to you how human or not human those issues are, essentially. And as for people whose broadcasts I've heard, they've really run the gamut on that. They've gone from, I had one that was pretty upbeat, like country playlist. I had Sean Drake of a couple of Drakes did one for his game, or his company's game, Dead Belt, which is sort of a space cowboy thing. And it was very much this like, I am a voice floating in space, a million miles from anyone kind of vibe, where there was this sort of like hopefulness to it, but very like, just darkness everywhere, quite literally in space. So I think more often than not, people read it the way that you do. But yeah, no, it has honestly been a range so far, which is pretty exciting to see.
Okay, well, I'm glad there's a range, so that's interesting, but I'm also glad it's not just me, because if it's like Jess, that's so weird. Everyone else has gone somewhere else. Talk about it in therapy, Jess. Okay, so this sounds really great, and like we mentioned, you can do something you do on your own, or it's part of this community thing. Did you mention there was something about you rebroadcasting or sharing things people send in?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I've had this AM transmitter and tower longer than I thought to make a game out of it. It's just something I did as a hobby. It's in my garage. It extends all of 2 miles, not very impressive. But that's what's legal. That's, before the FCC shuts me down. But yeah, no, I kind of added as a component, like, because of that performance aspect. I also gave people a way to, if you've recorded a show, built a playlist, you're really proud of them and you want to put them out there, just email me and I will put it up on my YouTube channel. I'll run the broadcast. I'll run your DJ breaks. I'll kind of give you an intro and outro. And so far I've run 4 of them so far, 4 weeks in a row, just on Sunday nights. Yeah, like people send in, it's been, whether it's the very baseline, here's my DJ break, like audio files, and then here's my playlist, and I'll assemble them in order and play them. Or I mentioned Sean Drake earlier, like he did a full front to back playlist and this very, like, I don't know, he really got into the performance of it. So I have this old tube TV. So I did like Space Field going by, since it was outer space. And Dylan did his show where he was out in the desert, out in the Mojave Desert somewhere. And he did a full on video for my TV that was all like desert footage at night, like cactuses and moon in the sky and old shacks and things like that. Like, and again, to your point, kind of had that ominous air to it. Had a little bit of like the music was mostly upbeat and pretty, whatever, but the breaks got weirder as they went. So he really got into this. Like, he's already talking about doing more and kind of building the story of his DJ character. But yeah, it's basically just another way to give people a chance to express themselves. And it's, as a music lover, it is exciting to get in playlists of stuff I haven't heard before or stuff I haven't listened to in a long time, and to hear their stories about why they picked those songs. It's really gratifying. I mean, it's community building, but it's also on everyone's terms at their own pace. Like, we're not all talking live. They build their show, they send it in to me, I listen to it in private, I play it. It's I don't know, messages in a bottle back and forth. And I don't know, it's been very exciting to do. And yeah, having 4 weeks in a row of stuff to play was more than I could have expected. For sure.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like it's the perfect thing for like an actual play radio podcast sort of thing, because it leans into that so heavily. So I'm really glad you have a way for people to share these stories. If they've made something, they're like, actually, I do want to share this. It's really great. Something's in place for that. So you mentioned it is available now. So where can people go to find out more information, or to download a PDF or order a book? Where can they do that?
Sure. Yeah. So of course I've got it on Itch. I've got my Itch page has everything I've got, and that URL right there has a link to where it's available elsewhere. Right now in print, I believe it's only at Indie Press Revolution, although various shops, of course, order from them. So it might be at Lyrically Game Shop. I don't know, but you can order directly from them as a consumer if you like. I did have it at the Knave of Cups shop for a month, and then it sold out twice. And then it should be back in September. I think they're doing like a solo game month then. But yeah, it's also on PDF at Drive-Thru RPG as well.
Perfect. Well, those places people can pick that up, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So Ken, my last kind of question for you to kind of wrap things up is, do you have any recommendations for any other kind of indie tabletop RPGs? And I know we've mentioned Anamnesis already, so maybe that'll count as a reference, but do you have any others you'd recommend?
Yeah. On the solo space right now, I really want to try out. I mentioned a moment ago Dead Belt, which has that space cowboy kind of, it's a little bit Cowboy Bebop, but it's a little bit, I don't know, there's darkness on the edges of it that I'm really interested in, because it has solo and then it has 2-player mode. And I've got the PDF, I've read it, I haven't really started it yet, and I do want to give that a try. And that, to me, I tend to do solo games that are, for lack of a better phrase, down to earth. And this one will push me a little bit on that front to go sci-fi, find the humanity in that anyway, and do that. So I think that's basically next on my list for solo games. But like Dicebreaker just put out a thing of 15 solo games, and I think I heard of maybe 4 of them. So I've got a lot of homework. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I know that space pretty well. And yet there were a bunch there I'd never heard of, or I'd heard of once 6 months ago and kind of forgotten about. Rune is another one I think I'm looking forward to checking out, and one I know nothing about other than it's called Wreck This Deck, and I think you deface a deck of cards as you play. Very interested in that. And then there's Forgery, I think is the next one, which is you're doing a paint by numbers of a painting of, I may be misrepresenting it, but it's possessed or evil or something is wrong with this painting as you were creating it. Cool. And yeah, I'm just very interested to see how that works.
I'm also super interested, so I'm going to check out that list and check out that Dicebreaker list as well, because I'm just starting my journey into solo RPGs. So yeah, I'm going to check that as well. And I also for sure will be playing Void 1680 AM, and I'll probably send you mine when I do that as well for community things as well when I get around to playing that. So Ken, thank you so much for coming back again. We'd be more than happy to have you on the show again when you have another game to share with us, as you're always a wonderful guest to have on. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much to everyone who watched and listened. We'll be back next week with another episode of Not D&D with a new indie tabletop RPG for you to check out. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.